Merry Christmas to me. This is the best gift I could ask for.
The room erupted in laughter as the pen touched the paper. For Lucas Bennett, this wasn't just a resignation, it was a death sentence. To save his daughter from a framed prison charge, he was signing away his future in front of a crowd of mocking billionaires. But as the ink dried, a chilling silence swept the room. Lucas didn't know it yet, but that signature just triggered a hidden legacy no one saw coming. The people laughing, they're about to realize they just tried to fire their own boss. If this story resonates with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, Lucas and I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The Thorn Plaza Ballroom was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain from vaulted ceilings, casting prismed light onto marble floors, and the air smelled thick with expensive oud wood, imported lilies, and the metallic tang of money. Lucas Bennett stood near a towering spruce tree draped in diamonds, adjusting the cuffs of a suit that had seen better days. It was slightly tight across his broad shoulders, a relic of a life before he became a single father fighting for every paycheck. He didn't belong here, among titans of industry and women dripping in jewels that cost more than his apartment. Yet he was a man who kept his word. He had promised his 6-year-old daughter Sophie that he would attend the company gala to represent the hard-working hands of the logistics department, even if he felt like a ghost among the living. Across the room, Lyra Thorne stood in a gown of shimmering emerald that clung to her hourglass figure, her long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders like silk. She was the youngest board member and by far the most formidable. To the world, she was the unreachable ice queen, but as she watched the sea of fake smiles, her heart felt heavy. Her eyes drifted through the crowd and landed on Lucas. He looked out of place, yet possessed a rugged, clean handsomeness that far outshone the pampered airs surrounding him. At 5'9", he held himself with a quiet, resilient energy, the posture of a man who carried the weight of the world without complaining. Lucas felt her gaze and offered a small, humble nod. He didn't know her name, only that she looked like a dream he had no right to have. He checked his watch. He needed to get home to put Sophie to bed. But before he could slip away toward the exit, the music stopped abruptly. Serafina, the CEO's ambitious niece, stepped onto the small stage, her eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Lucas with a predatory gleam. She hated his natural popularity among the staff, his refusal to be intimidated by her rank. "Before we move to the carols," Serafina's voice cut through the silence, sharp and mocking, "we have a special presentation for one of our most dedicated employees." Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind howling outside the enormous windows. The room went silent, the predatory instinct of the elite sensing a kill. If you were in Lucas's shoes, standing alone in a room full of people who looked down on you, would you stay to face the music or walk out to protect your peace? Let me know what you would do in the comments below. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out by the collective gaze of the socialites. Serafina stood on the podium, her silk dress rustling like a snake in dry grass. With a cruel, polished smile, she beckoned Lucas forward. "Mr. Bennett, don't be shy. After all, your contributions to our warehouse deserve a grand finale." Lucas walked toward the stage, his boots sounding heavy against the marble. Every step felt like he was walking toward a gallows. As he reached the podium, Serafina didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she slid a single crisp folder across the mahogany surface. Beside it sat a heavy gold fountain pen. "Consider this a Christmas mercy," Serafina whispered, loud enough for the front row of investors to hear. "We know about the irregularities in your department. Sign this resignation, and we won't involve the police. You'll walk away with your dignity, mostly, and a tiny severance for your daughter's medical bills." Lucas's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Irregularities? It was a lie, a calculated strike to clear him out before the year-end bonuses. He looked at the papers, the legal jargon blurring before his eyes. He thought of Sophie, of her inhalers, of the small pile of gifts he'd hidden under her bed that he still hadn't fully paid for. If he fought this, they would bury him in legal fees. If he signed, he was homeless by New Year's. The silence in the room broke. A soft titter of laughter began at the back and rippled forward. The wealthy guests leaned in, enjoying the spectacle of a strong man being brought to his knees. Serafina leaned closer, the scent of her expensive perfume cloying and suffocating. "Sign it, Lucas, or do you want Sophie to spend Christmas morning watching her father get handcuffed?" His hand trembled as he reached for the pen. It felt impossibly heavy, cold against his skin. A single hot tear escaped, trailing down his cheek and landing on the white paper, blooming like a saltwater flower. He didn't wipe it away. With a shaking hand, he scrawled his name, Lucas Bennett, effectively erasing his future to protect his daughter's present. The room erupted into mocking applause and laughter. Lucas looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and raw, and found Lyra's gaze. She wasn't laughing. Her glass of champagne was frozen halfway to her lips, her knuckles white as she gripped the stem. In that moment of absolute humiliation, the only thing Lucas felt was the cold, hollow ache of a man who had just lost everything but his soul. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung shut behind Lucas, muffling the cruel echoes of laughter, but the sound remained burned into his mind. He moved down the long, dim corridor of the Thorn Plaza like a man walking through a dream or a nightmare. His breath hitched in his chest, jagged and painful. He reached the heavy glass doors leading to the grand stone balcony and shoved them open. The winter air hit him like a physical blow, a brutal contrast to the stifling heat of the gala. He leaned against the icy stone railing, his knuckles white, his head bowed. He tried to tell himself it was just a job. He tried to rationalize that he had saved Sophie from the trauma of seeing him disgraced further, but the lie tasted like copper in his mouth. He wasn't just unemployed. He was branded a thief by people who had never worked a day in their lives. He felt the urge to run, to disappear into the snowy night, but his legs felt like lead. "The air's cleaner out here, isn't it?" The voice was cool, melodic, and dangerously close. Lucas didn't turn. He knew that voice, the woman in emerald. Lyra Thorne stepped onto the balcony, the silk of her gown shivering in the wind. She stood a few feet away, her silhouette sharp against the city lights. "I don't need a witness to my failure, Miss Thorne," Lucas said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He straightened his shoulders, trying to reclaim some shred of the dignity Serafina had just shredded. Lyra resisted the urge to reach out. Her corporate training told her to remain detached. Investors didn't mingle with personnel issues. She told herself she was only here to ensure there wasn't a PR disaster on the balcony. "Serafina is aggressive," Lyra said, her own voice tight. "But the board expects results, Lucas. It's business." "Business?" Lucas finally turned, his eyes flashing with a raw, dangerous fire that made Lyra's breath catch. "Threatening a man's child isn't business, it's cowardice." "I didn't know about the girl," Lyra lied, resisting the sudden sharp pang of guilt in her chest. She wanted to offer him a check, a way out, but his pride was a physical barrier between them. "Now you do," Lucas snapped, pulling his worn coat tight. "Good night, Miss Thorne. Enjoy the rest of the party." He turned to leave, but as he reached the doors, a massive gust of wind rattled the glass. A security guard stepped out, his face pale. "Mr. Bennett, Miss Thorne, the storm has turned. The city has issued a red alert lockdown. No one is leaving the plaza tonight." The lobby of Thorn Plaza was a chaotic sea of velvet and sequins turned sour by panic. The red alert meant the city had closed all bridges and tunnels. Not even the board members could leave until the private plows cleared the drifts. For Lucas, the news was a second humiliation. He didn't care about the frozen city. He cared about the 6-year-old girl waiting for him at home, with a babysitter who had a strict midnight curfew. "My office," Lyra said, her voice commanding despite the surrounding noise. She saw the way Lucas's eyes darted toward the exit, the desperation in his stance. "The cellular repeaters are stronger there. You need to call your daughter, and you won't get a signal in this crowd." Lucas hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay in the shadows, to remain the nobody they had just tried to erase, but the thought of Sophie waking up to an empty house over a babysitter who had a strict midnight curfew overrode his pride. He followed Lyra through the restricted executive wing, a place he had only ever seen from the business end of a floor buffer during his first year at the company. Lyra's office was a sanctuary of glass and dark mahogany, smelling of aged paper and expensive espresso. As she flipped the lights, the soft amber glow caught the sharp, rugged lines of Lucas's jaw and the weary slump of his shoulders. Up close, away from the judgmental glare of the ballroom, Lyra noticed the small details, the way his hands, though calloused from years of labor, moved with a gentle precision, and the deep, soulful brown eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets. "Use the desk phone," she said, gesturing toward the heavy crystal handset. She turned toward the floor-to-ceiling window, giving him a semblance of privacy, but she couldn't help but listen. "Sophie? Baby, it's Daddy." I know. The snow is very loud, isn't it? Listen, I'm staying in a big, safe castle tonight. No, don't cry. I'll be home for breakfast. I love you more than all the stars." When he hung up, the silence in the room was heavy, charged with a tension that felt more like a connection than a conflict. Lucas didn't look at her. He was staring at a framed black and white photo on her desk, a vintage picture of the company's original founder. "You have a gift," Lyra murmured, finally turning to face him. The movement emphasized the curve of her waist, but her expression was uncharacteristically soft. With her, most men in this building don't even know their children's middle names. "I'm not most men in this building, Miss Thorne," Lucas replied, his voice a low, steady vibration. For a moment, the vast gap between the billionaire investor and the fired employee vanished. They were just two souls trapped in a glass tower while the world turned white outside. The hum of the office's climate control was the only sound competing with the muffled roar of the blizzard against the reinforced glass. Lyra watched Lucas as he stood before the vintage photograph of her grandfather, Elias Thorne. The light from a desk lamp caught the sharp angle of Lucas's cheekbone and the way his jaw tightened. He wasn't looking at the man in the photo. He was staring at the heavy, distinctive signet ring on the founder's right hand, a crest of a rising phoenix etched into dark onyx. Slowly, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. From it, he produced a ring. It was tarnished, the silver dulled by years of being tucked away, but the design was unmistakable. The same phoenix, the same onyx. "Where did you get that?" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper, the Ice Queen facade cracking as she stepped closer. The scent of her perfume, something like midnight jasmine, drifted toward him, but Lucas didn't flinch. "My father," Lucas said, his voice thick with a history he rarely spoke aloud. "He was a janitor at a hospital in the city. He never had much, but he told me to never sell this. He said it was the only thing that proved he came from somewhere, that he wasn't just a shadow." He looked at the ring, then back at the photo. "I always thought it was a cheap replica, a poor man's dream of being important." Lyra reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the cold metal in his palm. Her skin was soft, a stark contrast to the rough calluses of his hand. "My grandfather lost his younger brother in the Great Fog of '52. They were separated during a transit accident. Elias spent millions trying to find him, but the trail went cold. That ring, it was a pair. Only two were ever made." The weight of the realization hung between them, heavier than the snow outside. Lucas pulled his hand back, the metal searing his skin with the heat of a truth he wasn't ready to claim. "It doesn't change anything," he rasped, his eyes shadowed with a sudden sharp grief. "I'm still the man who just signed away his life in a room full of people who think I'm a thief." "I don't think you're a thief, Lucas," Lyra said softly. For the first time, she saw the man behind the logistics worker, the pride, the exhaustion, and the fierce protective love for a daughter that mirrored the loneliness she felt in her own gilded cage. The storm rattled the heavy reinforced windows, but inside the executive lounge, the world had shrunk to the small space between them. Lyra had traded her emerald heels for a pair of plush guest slippers, a rare crack in her Ice Queen armor that made Lucas's pulse quicken. She'd found a stash of gourmet chocolates and a bottle of sparkling water in a hidden kitchenette. A meager feast, but in the dim amber glow of the office, it felt like a banquet. "I used to think money was a shield," Lyra said softly, sitting on the edge of her mahogany desk. Her long, dark hair spilled over one shoulder, framing the delicate curve of her neck. "That if I built enough walls made of glass and gold, nothing could ever reach me. But standing in that ballroom tonight, watching what they did to you, I've never felt more ashamed of the world I live in." Lucas sat opposite her, his 5'9" frame looking solid and grounded against the airy, expensive furniture. He broke a piece of dark chocolate, the snap of it loud in the quiet room. "My walls are made of unpaid bills and double shifts," he replied, a small, tired smile tugging at his handsome, rugged features. "I don't have time to feel ashamed. I just have time to be a father." He began to tell her about Sophie, how she insisted on wearing her mismatched socks for good luck, and the time she tried to bake him a hero cake that ended up looking like a science experiment gone wrong. As he spoke, the hardness in his eyes softened, replaced by a glow of pure paternal adoration. Lyra laughed, a genuine, melodic sound that filled the room and seemed to chase away the cold shadows of the evening's humiliation. For a moment, the class divide vanished. She wasn't the billionaire investor, and he wasn't the man who had just signed away his livelihood. They were just two souls finding warmth in a blackout. She reached out, her hand hovering near his calloused palm. The air between them vibrated with a fragile, sudden electricity. "You're a good man, Lucas Bennett," she whispered, her gaze lingering on his face. "You have a wealth they could never understand." Lucas felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It felt like the beginning of a healing he didn't think he deserved. But even as the bond tightened, the wind outside shrieked, a reminder that the world waiting for them at dawn remained unchanged and unforgiving. The fragile peace of the office was shattered not by the storm, but by the heavy click of a designer heel against the hardwood floor. The door swung open, and Serafina stood there, her perfectly coiffed hair now a wild halo of blonde, her eyes burning with a mixture of exhaustion and malice. She had clearly spent the night pacing the lower floors, and seeing Lucas and Lyra sitting together, sharing water and stories, sent her over the edge. "How touching," Serafina spat, her voice shrill in the quiet room. "The heiress and the thief playing house while the world freezes." Lucas stood up instantly, his 5'9" frame tensing, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "I'm not a thief, Serafina. You know that." "Do I?" Serafina stepped into the light, a cruel smirk twisting her lips. "I know that the logs were altered by my own assistant on my direct orders. I know there was never any missing inventory, but the board doesn't know that, and they won't care. You have your signature on that resignation, Lucas. You're a liability, a nobody we use to balance the books for the holiday audit." Lyra stood up, her face pale with fury. "You set him up? You admitted to fraud just to humiliate him?" "I did what was necessary for the firm," Serafina countered, stepping closer to Lyra, ignoring Lucas as if he were furniture. "But look at you, Lyra, falling for a sob story. You're only talking to him because you love a project. You want to play savior because your own life is so empty. He's just a charity case in a cheap suit, and once the sun comes up, you'll realize you can't bring a man like that to brunch at the country club." Lucas felt the words like physical blows. The warmth he had felt with Lyra only moments ago turned into a freezing pit of shame in his stomach. He looked at Lyra, her emerald garn, her diamond earrings, and then at his own rough, calloused hands. Serafina's poison hit the mark. He felt like a fool for believing a woman like Lyra could truly see him. He felt the weight of his poverty, his logistics worker status, and the crushing reality that he was now unemployed with a sick daughter at home. "Is that what this is?" Lucas's voice was a low, broken rasp. He didn't wait for Lyra to answer. He couldn't bear to see the pity he was sure was in her eyes. He grabbed his worn coat and turned toward the door. "I'm done being the entertainment for the night." If someone you were starting to care for was accused of only liking you out of pity, would you stay to hear their side, or would your pride make you walk away? Tell us how you'd handle this in the comments.
The silence of the service stairwell was louder than Seraphina's screams. Lucas sat on a cold concrete step, the resignation papers crumpled in his fist. Through a small, high window, the first gray light of dawn began to bleed across the skyline, illuminating the white devastation of the storm. He looked at his hands, the hands that had worked double shifts, the hands that had rocked Sophie to sleep, the hands that had just signed away his future. Was Seraphina right? Was he just a project to a woman like Lyra? The thought stung worse than the freezing air. His pride urged him to walk out the side exit, to disappear into the snowy streets and never look back. He could find another job, he could scrape by. But then he felt the hard, cold edge of the signet ring in his pocket. If he walked away now, he wasn't just walking away from a paycheck, he was walking away from the truth of his father's life. He was letting the lies of the elite define his daughter's heritage. The heavy door at the top of the stairs creaked open. Lyra stood there, silhouetted by the hallway light. She had draped a simple white wool coat over her emerald gown, her face pale and etched with an uncharacteristic vulnerability. She didn't approach him with the detached confidence of a billionaire investor. She stayed at the top of the stairs, her breath hitching in the cold. "I'm not looking for a project, Lucas," she said, her voice echoing in the hollow concrete space. "I'm looking for justice, and I'm looking for a reason to believe that this city isn't as cold as the ice outside." Lucas didn't look up at first. "You have everything, Lyra. Why do you care about a man who has nothing?" "Because you don't have nothing," she countered, stepping down one stair, then another, until she was close enough to see the raw pain in his eyes. "You have the one thing no one in that ballroom can buy. You have a heart that hasn't been corrupted by the gold. If you leave now, Seraphina wins. The lies win. Is that the lesson you want to teach Sophie? That when the world gets loud, we just go quiet?" Lucas looked at the ring, then at the woman standing before him. The choice was a razor's edge. Protect his bruised pride or risk his heart on the hope that someone like Lyra could truly see him. He stood up, slowly smoothing out the crumpled resignation papers. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Lyra reached out, her fingers lacing through his calloused hand. "We go to the chairman, together." The sun finally breached the horizon, turning the snow-covered city into a blinding landscape of gold and white. Inside the chairman's private study, the air was still. Elias Thorne, a man whose presence was as heavy as the history he'd built, sat behind a desk of ancient oak. He didn't look at the resignation papers Lyra had placed before him. His eyes were fixed entirely on the signet ring resting in Lucas's open palm. "My brother, Julian, took that ring with him when he left for the coast in '52, Elias whispered, his voice cracking with a decade's worth of suppressed grief. "He wanted to start his own life, away from the shadow of this company. We thought he perished in the great fog." He looked up at Lucas, seeing not a warehouse worker, but the ghost of a brother he had loved and lost. The rugged lines of Lucas's face, the resilient set of his 5'9" frame, it was the Thorne blood, unmistakable and proud. Seraphina burst into the room, her composure finally shattered. "Grandfather, this is a scam. He's a thief who stole a relic to—" "Silence,"
Elias's voice boomed, silencing her instantly. He turned to Lyra. And the fraud? The digital logs prove she orchestrated the entire inventory loss, grandfather, Lyra said, her voice steady and sharp. She tried to destroy a man's life to protect her own ego. Elias stood slowly, his gaze turning to Serafina with a coldness that signaled the end of her reign. You are stripped of your title and your shares effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You've forgotten that this company was built on the dignity of men like Lucas Bennett. As Serafina was led away in a storm of silent fury, the room softened. Elias walked around the desk and placed a trembling hand on Lucas's shoulder. You are not a logistics worker, Lucas. You are a thorn. This empire belongs to you as much as it does to Lyra. I want to meet my great-granddaughter. I want Sophie to have the Christmas she deserves. Lucas felt the weight of years of struggle finally lift, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the office heaters. He looked at Lyra, who was watching him with a soft, radiant smile that made his heart swell. The class divide had been a lie. The only thing that mattered was the truth they had found in the dark. I think Sophie would like that, Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, and this time, when Lyra took his hand, it wasn't to lead him, it was to walk beside him. As they stood together in the morning light, the Ice Queen and the single dad were gone, replaced by two people who had finally found home. Lucas's life changed forever because he chose truth over pride. Have you ever had a moment where standing your ground led to a miracle you never expected? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to celebrate with you. Thank you for watching another story of Lucas Bennett to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as wild and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So like the video and subscribe for more, because Lucas and I will be waiting for you tomorrow.